Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good night. I invite the panelists to come up and open their camera. Hello, everyone. So this is indeed the panel Challenges and Resonances of the Democratizing Work Manifesto for Decarbonizing. I'm Isabel Ferreras, and I'm not Arpitha Kodiveri, who is a professor at New York University, but who was too sick this morning to show up on screen. So Arpitha will not be here, and I have the great pleasure to take over and be the chair for this session. We have an exciting lineup of panelists today in the context of this global forum on democratizing work. And I really want to thank the four panelists to be here with us to continue our thinking or deepening of interaction and consideration of the three principles of the manifesto. As you know, today is the third day of our global forum. It's been really exciting all along. We are a bit tired, but we're very excited and energized by the fact that indeed the resonance of the three principles has been high. That said, there are many challenges ahead. So we are going to hear from the four panelists who are going to address the question from very, very different angles. And this is what we are looking for through this forum, is not to be an academic forum, but to be really a forum that helps us organize the meeting, if you want, of science and society. And so there are academics on this panel, but there are also doers, elected officials, people who are confronted with these challenges firsthand. So our guests today are László Andor, who is the former EU Commissioner for Employment and Social Affairs and who's currently the Secretary General of the European Foundation for Progressive Studies. Thank you very much to be with us today. We also have the great pleasure to have Thomas Dermine, who is a State Secretary for Scientific Policy in Belgium, Recovery Program and Strategic Investments of the Belgian federal government. Thank you very much for being with us. We also have the great pleasure to have Alyssa Battistoni, who is a political theorist and assistant professor of political science at Barnard College, who has written already extensively, despite her young age, on the challenges of decarbonizing. And she's a co-author of the best-selling book, A Planet to Win, with her co-author, Kate Aronoff, who's going to be part of the plenary panel that will follow this panel. Thank you very much for being with us, Alyssa. And last but not least, Gregor Murray, who is a professor at the University of Montreal, who is certainly a pioneer in the domain of democratizing, decommodifying, and decarbonizing through a huge research network that he coordinates at the University of Montreal around experimentations for better or worse work, which is a collaborative research program of more than 25 universities across the globe. Gregor Murray is the director of the CRIMPT, the Center for Interdisciplinary Research on Globalization and Work. So the way we're going to do this is to leave each of the panelists 7-8 minutes to develop their thoughts about what they see as priorities in terms of those challenges and resonances of the Working Manifesto vis-à-vis decarbonizing. And when we mean decarbonizing, obviously, we mean more than just the CO2 reduction, but we mean to take care of the planet, obviously. So we are going to hear from them, and then we'll open the discussion. You are invited to ask questions through the Q&A as the speakers are speaking. So I suggest we hear first from Thomas Dermine, because Thomas has generously managed to be with us, yet he has an urgent meeting which was set at 4 p.m. Brussels time, which means we still have 10 minutes with Thomas, yet I'm sorry, I have a return sound here. I don't know if this is great. Thank you. But a collaborator from the State Secretary will stay with us. And so it's really good, so we can address questions along the panel, and we'll have hopefully also responses. So thank you so much, Thomas Dermine, for being with us, and the floor is yours. Yes, you need to,
Yes, hello, good afternoon to everyone. I'm glad to be with you and to be part of this impressive movement of democratizing words that you have launched a few months ago. As mentioned by Isabel, I'm a member of the Belgian government working on the Recovery and Resilience Plan funded by the EU, and I will address the issue of decarbonizing with this lens, and sharing with you the importance of infrastructure. I don't know if you're able to see my screen.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. And the claim that I will have in this few minutes is that basically climate and infrastructure are completely inseparable, and that every decision we make about infrastructure is a decision about climate change, and vice versa. And actually, I'm quite an optimist, because actually in the past we have done transition like the one we have to do in the coming 10-20 years. We have gone from an energetic paradigm that was dominated by coal to a paradigm based on petrol, and we've done it in a couple of decades, in the 50s and the 60s. And basically the issue we have today, coming from an economy which is based on petrol to an economy which will be based on carbon neutral energy, is the same kind of transition. And we have been able to do it in the past, but we have done it via massive public investments. We have done it in investing massively in the road infrastructure. We have done it in investing massively in networks to be able to transport energy, and so on. And so basically, it's the challenge we have today, and it's a challenge of infrastructure. And how can we build the infrastructure which is needed to reach a carbon neutral economy? And so I will share with you a few data from Belgium, but I guess that if you would do the same kind of analysis for any member states in Europe, you would find the same findings. What you see, and here you have the level of public investments as a percentage of GDP, is that we've gone in the year 60s from levels that were 5 or 6% of our GDP that were invested in public infrastructure, to a level in 2019 where we are below 3%. In Belgium, it's about 2.5%. So we see that in the past we've been able to invest massively in our infrastructure, and that's basically when we built the infrastructure required for an economy based on petrol. In the years 60s, 70s in Belgium, we were building massively housing projects, we were building the road infrastructure, and that's the type of investment we need today if we want to neutralize the carbon emissions. If we compare the share of public investment in Belgium in Europe, you will see that basically European average is around 3%, 3.5%. Belgium is 2%, 2.5%. So the European average is quite low in comparison with what it was in the past, and the Belgian average is even lower. What's even more frightening is that the previous version was the flow of investment. This is what we call the net public capital stock. It's basically if you would put a theoretical value on the value of every public asset, so the buildings of the school, the railway network, the energy networks, you would come up to this value, the net public capital stock. And what we see across most of the member states, and it's for sure the case in Belgium, is that we are reducing every year the net public capital stock, which means that actually the amount we invest every year is not big enough just to renew the existing capital stock. You see in Belgium a small uptick in the year 2012, 2013. It's when the Belgian state acquired the bank Fortis and Dexia. But that's the only exception in a trend that goes downward. And so the reason this is very frightening to me is that we have ahead of us a massive transition that we need to make. We know that to achieve this transition, like we have done it in the past, we need to invest massively. But what we are doing today is even not enough just to renew the stock of existing infrastructure. So that's why in this government in Belgium, we have the ambition to go back to 4% of investment rate by 2030 with an interim objective of 3.5% by the end of 2024. It's ambitious, but it's also very low if you compare to what we were in the past, if you compare to the Belgian average. And what's amazing is that the RRF, so the Recovery and Resilience Fund from the EU, will give an initial kick to this increase in public investment and will cover around 50% of what we need to achieve our target by 2024. We have worked with the European Commission on a plan that we submitted and that was approved this summer. In this plan, we have 85 investment projects. You see in this graph the different kind of investment projects. You see that the graph is dominated by the green color, which means that we have about 2 billion of projects related to sustainability. It's renovation of public housing, investment in new energy networks. We have also the second biggest category, which is mobility, and there we invest massively in our railway infrastructure. In the bike, we built highways for bike around the big cities. It's also a very important thematic. If we categorize the type of projects, what we see is that the vast majority, about 60% of the projects, are infrastructure projects. The remainder is made of R&D projects, human capital investment, and ICT. And the reason why infrastructure is the biggest category is that because it has a short-term effect. It's the Keynesian effect on the recovery of the economy. But it's the type of project we need if we want to be credible in our ambition to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. As I said in my introduction, when we talk about infrastructure, we talk about climate, and when we talk about climate, we talk about infrastructure. I will just leave you there with maybe two final thoughts in the remaining 2 minutes. The first one is that I believe that the nature of the solution to climate change must equate the nature of the problem. And so we know that climate change is a collective and systemic issue. We need to have collective and systemic answers to climate change. And there are studies that show that if we would all behave like perfect citizens in the way we move, in the way we eat, we will only bring a very partial answer to the issue of climate change. The rest needs to be done by collective investment in our infrastructure, and it's high time to do it. And we've done it in the past, and we should do it in the future. And to work on that, we should work on the revision of the Stability and Growth Pact, which is a key enabler to increase the level of public investment. The second thought I would like to share with you is that we need to do more. We know that we need to invest 3.7% of our GDP if we want to achieve climate neutrality. So today in Belgium, we are aiming for 3.5% in whole, but actually if we want to do, if we want to reach climate neutrality, we should do that only for climate change. So in China, they are doing it. They are investing massively in the infrastructure. We should do the same in Europe. It's amazing that Europe launched the RRF with 750 billion euro that will be spent mostly in infrastructure. But if Europe want to be a front runner in the fight for climate change, we should do such a plan every year in the infrastructure in the next 10 years. Thank you very much. We lost Isabel.
Tamar, in Isabel's absence, I don't. It's Gregor here in Montreal, and I just wonder if because Tamar needs to leave, whether there's any question that anyone wants to ask him amongst the panelists, given your other constraints, which we understand.
Thank you very much.
And maybe we could. I don't have access to everything while we're waiting, but excuse me for stepping into the chair, but. Alyssa, László, even Naeem with a softball question. Something you want to ask Tamar?
I'll ask a question. That was a great presentation. It was really interesting, and I completely agree with the climate and infrastructure together claim. I'm just curious how labor unions have been part of the kind of the politics around increasing infrastructure investment, since in the US where I am, there's been a lot of tension around how both obviously how climate action will affect labor, but also potentially infrastructure as a way of bringing labor unions on board. And since we're talking about democratizing work, if you have any thoughts on how organized labor might be part of this project.
And Tamar, if I may, I think we'll, because of the time constraints, we'll group a couple of questions. If László, you have one? Or it's okay? László.
Yes. Question?
Do you have a question, László?
No,
okay.
I didn't signal any.
Apologies for putting you on the spot. I will ask you, Tamar, and this is in the big picture of things, and I understand that your focus needs to be on infrastructure. So here we're talking somewhere between 2.5% and an aspirational goal in 2030 of 4%. If we look at Belgian GDP, what percentage of that GDP, and I understand if there's no ready answer, but is going, say, to subsidies for firms that are engaged in green transition. In other words, it's one of those issues of the relative size of the effort. In some senses, I have the impression that states are falling behind. Well, markets are running ahead and firms are running ahead because of the risk elements of climate transition. And I'll just explain to Isabel. Isabel, I usurped your role as chair and asked if there were a couple of questions. There was one from Alyssa and one from me, given that Tamar needs to leave, so that we're asking a couple of questions, and he now has two. I don't know that you also have a question, Isabel. No, Alyssa asked about labor unions, and I asked about firms. So,
well, thank you so much for the self-organizing. Speaking about infrastructure, couldn't be more on point, because I'm at the Royal Academy in Brussels, and we had a massive outage of the internet. So this is infrastructure indeed. So I'm sorry about that. That's great. I think indeed, maybe I think I want to be true to our commitment. And if Thomas Dermine needs to leave by 4, I think we have to leave him to let him leave. I don't know, Thomas, if you can address the question. Otherwise, we'll see that with Naim, your collaborator. Oh yes, you need to unlock your microphone.
In a nutshell, and I will leave you in the good hands of Naim. And Naim has been the one doing the actual work on the drafting of the infrastructure plan. First, on Alyssa, to your question on how have been the unions involved in this process. They have been instrumental partners in the process. We have this, and I know it's completely different in the US, but in Belgium we have a very institutionalized way to involve the unions in what we name in French the concertation sociale. And so from day one, we involve the representative of the unions, the representative of the businesses in basically providing input, giving them the opportunity to give feedback and to review the assessments of the different projects. It was very time consuming, but it's part of the buy-in we got in the plan, and it's going to be very important for the implementation of the plan and to execute and deliver those investment projects. Gregor, to your question on firms, yes, indeed, it's I talk about public investment, but actually most of these projects are done and enhanced with private-public partnerships. So we involve companies, we involve industrial players in the delivering of those projects, in the co-investment of these projects. What I believe is very important to mention about infrastructure, it's often public infrastructure is an enabler for private investment. If I look at the type of investment we fund railway extension to access industrial sites. We fund a gas network to transport hydrogen or to capture carbon. And these kind of investments are needed as a kind of prerequisite for further investment by private businesses. And that's also, and it relates to the question of Alyssa, that's the reason we co-built this plan together with the businesses and the unions, because they were the ones actually giving us hints on what type of investments were the most instrumental in unleashing private investments as a result of those infrastructure investments.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Thomas. I think we are going to let you go. Have a good day. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Have a good
Naim.
day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Naim, for staying with us. And now I suggest we hear from Alyssa and then László and then Gregor for their opening remarks, so that we can sort of share the substance of your reactions to the issue of the resonance and the challenges of the Democratizing Work Manifesto vis-a-vis decarbonizing, and then we'll have hopefully the time to interact more fully. If that's okay with you, Alyssa, you can go first.
Yes, definitely. So I'm going to speak a little more generally based off of the piece I wrote for the U.S. edition of the Democratizing Work Manifesto book, which will be coming out soon. And so I'm just going to sort of give some of the, at a more general level, some of the ways that I think that the manifesto both resonates and the challenges it poses per the title of the panel. So I do think that we tend to treat decarbonization and democratizing work as separate challenges, or they're treated as on parallel tracks. So there's like an ecological track and an economic track. And at times, I think people may wonder, at least, and maybe this is based in a US perspective where there's been a lot of tension between labor and environmental movements, but that even democratizing work might not advance, certainly might not advance decarbonization, but might be at odds with it. And at times, if certain unions that are opposed to certain decarbonization programs, there might be more tension there than resonance. So I was trying to think through some of the ways that democratizing work is actually quite necessary to the project of decarbonization, in my opinion. So one thing I want to emphasize is what I think is the false nature of the tension between environmental and labor movements, or it's not totally false. There are real instances where restrictions on environmentally destructive industries can cost workers jobs. But the idea that environmental protections come at the expense of labor protections or labor or labor benefits, I think is overstated. We actually usually see where there are where corporations' power is unchecked, then both workers and environment tend to suffer. Isabel has noted in her piece for this book and the manifesto notes more generally that workers put their bodies on the line when they go to work every day, that they're investing their labor and they're investing in some sense their actual their body and when they go to work. And I think that that's a really important point when it comes to thinking about environmental protections more generally. Because it really, that is really one of the places where we see, where I think workers say over the production process and an ability to have a say in the conditions of their work really matters. So, we've seen regularly the kinds of pollution and waste and environmental harms that are often matters of concern for environmental movements, for environmental justice movements, affect workers first, workers who are in those kinds of those industries. That's a little bit less the case with carbon and decarbonization because, it's not, carbon itself is not an immediate bodily harm. But I think that the general idea that workers have a connection to communities that suffer the impacts of some of these, the side effects of certain kinds of production or certain kinds of industries is an important way we can think about how workers can both exert more control over what the conditions of work are, what the kinds of what is being produced, even what kinds of the goals of the firm are, and that might be also a way to connect not only workers but also workers to the communities of which they are a part. So there is this great. So I look, for example, to the history of the coal miners for democratic. Sorry, I forget the name of the exact thing. Coal miners for like a democratic coal miners union in the 1960s. The organizer Jablonski asked this great question: what good is a union that reduces coal dust in the mines only to have miners and their families breathe pollutants in the air, drink pollutants in the water, and eat contaminated commodities? And so he really calls for the union to address not only the conditions of work in the workplace, but also the conditions of work in the broader community, or the conditions that affect the broader community, and seeing workers as part of those communities. So I think this is an important model. We can see it in other models like the bargaining for the common good framework that's really emerged in the US in recent years, where unions bargain around the needs of the community at large, as well as on their sort of traditional issues of wages and benefits and working conditions. And I think that's an exciting model for decarbonizing and democratizing work, because it really does it presents an avenue for unions to be a voice for environmental justice, both within and outside the workplace. So those are, I think, some of the exciting points. There are a lot of challenges. One is that certainly workplaces are not very democratic right now. We're not in a position, certainly, where workers have much of a say in these areas. Unionization rates in the US, which is as close as we get to democratizing work, are very, very low, especially in the private sector. And of course, I think so. That's one sort of national level challenge. But obviously, one challenge I want to just raise is the fact that obviously climate change and other pressing environmental issues are global challenges. This is not necessarily a novel problem to decarbonization and environment. I think this is the same problem that faces the democratization of work more generally. The globalization of production makes it much harder to exert that kind of democratic control or to exercise democratic agency within the workplace or within firms that are multinational and both and may not be subject to, or may often be able to evade national restrictions, as well as the sorts of labor protections and rights that enable that kind of worker voice. So, I think this is both a challenge for both the democratizing work piece and the decarbonizing work piece, but potentially also a way to see them as, facing the same challenge together. Again, I think the challenge of addressing workers' protections, workers' treatment, workers' voice, and environmental degradation and harm are in fact the same problem, or at root the same problem of firms having the power to really do to act with impunity often, and so that is not an easy problem to solve, but I think it's one that either piece of this puzzle will have to figure out. So I think one exciting place to think about is, for example, how can we think about what the supply chains of the emerging green economy? How can we make, for example, the chain of battery production from lithium mining in Chile to battery production in China to electric vehicle manufacturing in the US? How can we connect workers along that kind of supply chain and also take into consideration environmental standards? So I think these are some of the questions and challenges that are going to be facing us as we see a lot of investment coming into sort of green technologies, decarbonizing projects. I certainly agree with Thomas' emphasis on public investment and infrastructure. And I think that that's actually a place where we can connect the call to democratize work to more generally the importance of public investment and sort of a democratization of investment in some sense, and a decommodification of certain kinds of services and or public forms of infrastructure, which we can talk more about. I know I'm a little bit over time, so I'm going to just pause there for now. But I think there are many more ways that the challenge of decarbonizing our economy really connects to the call to democratize work. There are a lot of challenges that I haven't even gotten to, but I'm excited to hear what the other panelists have to say. So thank you. So should we go next to László?
Okay. Can you hear me? More or less. Thank you very much. Look, Isabel, thanks very much for inviting me.
We can hear you well.
Thanks very much for inviting me to this panel. And obviously, the topic is fascinating. And I also want to congratulate you for the whole initiative, because putting the democratization of work on the agenda in scholarly research, but also in policy, is really a pioneering effort. And I think at this time, when the European countries and the European Union itself need a kind of new horizon, a new frontier regarding economic and social development, this can be one of the key ideas inspiring thinking, but also policy action. And the angle which we are discussing this today, decarbonization and tackling climate change, of course, is a top issue on the policy agenda. I think the popular demand from various generations, but especially the young people, helped identifying the problem of climate change as the #1 challenge of this time. But in the European policy agenda, what you have seen is the effort to reconcile the policies against climate change with the intention to preserve what we call a European social model. And this is obviously slightly different in Europe than in many other parts of the world, because the European integration has it as a key item of its identity, a strong social dimension, various definitions of social rights, which evolved in past decades with a de facto progress with what Esping Andersen also called the decommodification of labor. What did that mean in the post-war decades? It meant that in most democratic countries of Europe, you had strong and institutionalized forms of social dialogue at national level, industry level, but also company level, and various forms, various models of social security have also been built up, producing what we call the welfare state. And on the basis of this dual regulation, on the one hand, regulated working conditions, on the other hand, social security systems, the European countries always trying to tackle various challenges, whether they were cyclical or long-term structural challenges, and mitigate the social consequences. Now, from this point of view, I think in Europe there is a possibility to rely on experience when the social dimension of the climate transition has to be tackled. On the other hand, there is also a need for a huge amount of innovation. What does it mean exactly? It means that also in recent crises, like when the coronavirus suddenly destroyed much of the economic activities and resulted in a deep recession in 2020 and 21, most of the European countries, in a coordinated action, managed to introduce various schemes to protect jobs and save incomes. The so-called Kurzarbeit scheme, which was experimented in the previous decades mainly in Germany and other German-speaking countries, became a model, became more than an inspiration, but a prescription from the European Union to overcome this period of recession by shortening the working time and preserving as many workplaces as possible. Now, this is something which, especially Germany, but countries like Denmark, Austria, can also showcase. And the EU also started to fund and support the implementation with 100 billion euro, which is a large amount of money. The question is whether this type of experience can be used or not in the transition to a sustainable economy. The answer probably is that partly you can think about the adjustment and an adaptation of the working time, but in reality there's a major difference, because you can use short-time work arrangements when the problem is cyclical, when you have a shock, but you can expect a recovery on the basis of aggregate demand returning soon and generating again jobs, which is more or less happening today in most European countries, but also elsewhere in the world. So there is a certain period which you need to bridge by these short-time work schemes. And the other precondition, apart from the demand shock, has been to have a good, well-established, well-functioning social dialogue between employers and employees. Because if this is not well-functioning, of course, it's very difficult to find the right scheme and the right funding model. And we have seen this in practice too. Now, as opposed to a short-term recession triggered by coronavirus or other factors, the green transition is different. We have to speak about a longer-term transformation, a longer-term adaptation of all different types of economic activities. It means that specific economic activities, specific businesses, specific technologies, specific materials, and especially energy resources are going to be phased out. In a European context, for example, we speak about coal, which only provides about 20% of the electricity Europe consumes, but about 70% of the emission. So it's absolutely a fundamental question to phase out coal within the time frame that the European countries set for themselves. But obviously, the social implications have to be addressed. It is not simply about the jobs of people involved in the given sector, but also the various knock-on effects you can have all around the place. Regional problems, because obviously the economic activity we speak about, the production of coal-based energy is linked to specific regions or even micro-regions, and then to sustain employment opportunities in these regions requires a massive amount of investment. And that's when I would like to connect my my message with what Thomas Dermine was already mentioning a few minutes ago, because he explained the necessary amount of new investment which is necessary, more precisely new public and private investment, which is necessary to tackle this transition. So in a way, this scale of investment, which is necessary to deliver on the ambition that has been set under the Green Deal and other European policies, you need to recalibrate the entire macroeconomic governance framework of the European Union. So, we spoke about addressing the social implications at the micro level, but we also need to reconsider and recalibrate the macroeconomic governance structure, because going back to the pre-crisis straitjacket of fiscal rules in the European Union would certainly contradict all the ambition of the green transition because of the need for new investment, public as well as private. Of course, there are other reasons as well for the reform or even revamping of the macroeconomic governance, and especially the so-called fiscal rules. They have been not transparent enough. They were too much pro-cyclical as opposed to counter-cyclical. So you could, present a long list of why all this, has been problematic in practice, even if for some in theory it was a kind of splendid and easily understandable set of rules. But the climate question adds another dimension to the unsustainability of the fiscal framework. So these discussions at some point would need to reinforce each other, generating a new set of macroeconomic framework. It's in a way also how the macro and the micro level needs to be connected, that the European Union, from its own budget, which is a €1 trillion budget as we know it, needs to allocate much more than it was foreseen before the Green Deal to ensuring that the transition is just from the point of view of employment and social condition. Just transition has been in the talk for about 2 or 3 years now, and the original demands pointed to the level of about 50 billion euros, which would be needed to ensure that specifically the social aspects of the transition can be addressed. Now, at the end of the day, if the decision is up to the finance ministers, the amount given is going to be much less. So at the end, they arrive to 17.5. It's up to you to decide whether it's going to be sufficient or not. Sometimes you start with a number and you build on it when it turns out to be insufficient. But it should also be appreciated that the climate neutrality, the carbon neutrality to protect the climate is only one of the several important questions of climate and environment policy. You will also have issues like protecting biodiversity, and that adds to the broader problematic of the sustainability of our economic model, or more precisely, the lack of the sustainability and the need for adaptation and need for more and more social implications to be handled. My last point is that, of course, we need to speak a lot about the necessary resources, and that's definition of certain amounts of money and fiscal guarantees. On the other hand, there are probably many opportunities in technology, in lifelong learning, which would need to provide, let's say, the guidance for the new model. So yeah, I think without highlighting what activities, what economic structures, services, products, technologies we would need to develop newly, the whole discussion would have a flavor of negativity, as if our civilization would be ending because of the need to decarbonize. In reality, of course, many types of activities are ending, but thanks to the capacity to learn, the capacity to share good and sustainable practices, introduce new digital technologies and solutions, probably you can also outline a better model, which is not only more sustainable, but also delivers more social equality as well.
Thank you very much for this thoughtful contribution. I'm going to pass the mic to Gregor Murray, and hopefully we'll have the time to share a few thoughts, questions at the end. So Gregor, the floor is yours. If you don't mind to stick to like 6 or 7 minutes, that would be wonderful.
Just close my microphone, and thank you to all of you for being there. And first of all, kudos to Isabel and all of the other original drafters and those who've added on to the drafting of the manifesto, and all of the team that's helped them in bringing this all together. It's a tremendous achievement. We know that Isabel believes in real utopias. She's a visionary. She wants to bring ideas out and believes that ideas can be transformative. And thank you, Isabel, for all your hard work on this. Secondly, I'll probably say that I might have somewhat misinterpreted the request, but I think it all connects in the way that we've been talking. I understood that you wanted us to talk about resonances and challenges, and I knew it was on the decarbonization day, but I took it more generally in relation to the manifesto, and maybe influenced by the fact that I need to wish you all a world Decent Work Day, a happy Decent Work Day, which is Thursday, October 7th, which is to celebrate decent work. And I think that that's a significant part of what the manifesto is about. Now, resonance, it's perfect. I can stop there. It's a wonderful tool which sets out a set of principles which help us to think about core values that should inform all of our thinking about work and beyond. So full stop. And that's the resonance, and the fact that the manifesto was drafted by its group of authors and brought forward in this day and has sparked so much debate really highlights this. However, and I think that that's what you want, is the however, it's dated and requires an update. And the reason is that I think that that's why we're being invited to contribute to this global forum. And also it relates to learning that we couldn't have known about when you drafted the manifesto, which was so early into the pandemic. So there's a lot of things that have happened in the last 20 months, which colors and contextualizes our understanding of what's happened. And I just want to make 4 simple points about this, and I can cut off at any point. The first point is about inequality and the intersectional dimensions of that inequality. And you, in fact, drafted the manifesto before George Floyd was murdered on May 25th, 2020. There was already a movement on the ground, but that sparked such a powerful reaction. And of course, not just in the United States, but beyond its borders, in the way that we began to realize the lived experience of COVID in its revelation of class, racial, and gender lines. And we already knew this. And I think that it maybe was a bit of a blind spot in the original drafting of the manifesto. The gender dimensions were there, but less the race and class. And that's what's really come out in an explicit way over the COVID period. We could see, and there's so many studies that say who's more vulnerable, who was doing the care work. And already when in our subsequent discussions, and we organized one in the CRIMP network in November 2020, this was already fully taken on board by the authors of the manifesto. We could see that this was the case, but it's just become more and more evident. I remember Dominique Meda making the point about how the undervaluing of work in relation to its social utility, but the extra dimension of that is who is doing that blooming work. And so often in many, many places, it was immigrants, it was people of color, it was refugees, some conveniently called guardian angels in Canada because they were undocumented, and all of these kinds of issues. So I think that this needs to be brought forward in a more fundamental and forthright way. It's not just an undercurrent, it's a challenge. There are things that are happening as well, and I want to flag one, Unifor, which is one of the interesting progressive big unions in Canada, on the basis of a lot of work that they've been doing over the long time, introduced the notion of racial justice advocates in their new collective agreements in the auto industry. And these racial justice advocates engage in advocacy on dignity and discrimination issues, and also provide a network for training and action. And my common concern through all of the issues of the manifesto is how you move from up there to down here. The second point that I want to make, and I think that is decommodification. I think that some of those points have been made well. The irony of the decommodification and the job guarantee is that right now we are in a full-blown crisis of labor scarcity. So the job guarantee seems less a handle on which you want to get, and it's much more about good jobs, decent jobs, meaningful jobs, which is not in contradictory at all with the idea of a job guarantee. But the job guarantee seems a long way from what people are thinking about having decent jobs. We can all work at Amazon for somewhat close in the US, $15 an hour. So that meets certain basic career criteria, but we know all of the downsides of that in the logistics industry. So I'm really more concerned about skill guarantees than job guarantees. And that relates to the green transition. That's the ability to have sets of skills that help you to navigate the economy over this longer period of time. And of course, the complex aspect of decommodification is about supply chains and the rights along those chains mentioned by Alyssa, and that introduces a whole new sets of arguments. But that whole argument is all about structuring markets, mechanisms likely to produce better work, unions, collective agreements, minimum standards, fair work provisions in contracting out, requirements for decent work in public infrastructure, and mechanisms that produce worse work, outsourcing, privatization, lack of access to collective representation, legal impediments to working conditions. Now, I'll make a third point, which is about climate.
Gregor, we are a bit losing you. Gregor, can you hear me? Is this the case for other panelists? Are you also losing a bit, Gregor? Yes? Okay, so maybe, Gregor, you could turn off the camera. I don't know why sometimes that happens. Indeed, it's.
Yeah, see, I'm not sorry. Do you hear me better?
No, it's actually worse. I don't know. I don't know why, but oh yeah, okay. Now it's good. It's good.
But okay, well, I won't take too much longer because I realize that I'm getting into your 6 or 7 minutes. What I want to say about climate remediation is this. First of all, I think we're using decarbonizing as a better term and people understand it better than remediation. But it was written in a way that kind of thinks that firms are going to be dragged kicking and screaming to do the right thing. And my sense of what's happening is firms are moving at light speed on decarbonization. They know the financial risks related to what they're doing. They're moving very, very quickly, but they're not taking their workers with them. The workers don't have rights to this, and they're doing it as they wish. And hence the question that I asked to the Secretary of State, which is, in a sense, what are firms doing? But it's really, firms are getting huge amounts of money for green transitions, public-private partnerships, but there's no democratic requirements, there's no skill requirements, and outside of Europe, there's and specific agreements, there's probably few social dialogue requirements. So we really need to think about how to de-silo and introduce those skilling arrangements within the climate transition. And the other problem is that all of this, COP 26, 25, everything else is way up there, and where workers are in the workplace, they're not being provided tools to deal with this. I think that Germany provides one of those rare exceptions where you say, what's the program? What are the training programs? Do we have brokers to help people envisage what future and the need for skills will look like? And all of this connects to this de-siloing, which is the central aspect of democratization at work, and the need to build public policies, skill strategies, and to triangulate between democracy at work and digital and green transitions. And we shouldn't have any public policies on digital and green transitions which do not require democracy at work. And I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you to the three of you for your contributions and bringing to the table all these dimensions. I see very well taken point here. And obviously we don't have the time to address all this, but we could certainly go a bit over time if you have 5 or 10 more minutes. Would that be doable on your end? For László, is this manageable? For Naeem also, Alyssa too, and Gregor? Yes? Okay. Well, then we could, so we can go up to 55, if you don't mind. let me just say, so I suggest we exchange, react, maybe we can, so there is a question in the Q&A, and which really is oriented toward action, which is about how what are the best levers to use in order to support democratized firm. Is it legal mandates? Is it, I guess, the purchasing power of the state? I mean, indeed, there are many levers that could be activated if only there would be the political will to address that challenge. I wanted to maybe just highlight the fact that I think your contributions really resonate together in sort of orienting us toward projecting a sense of hope and perspective. What I hear, what I'm struck with hearing from you is that we indeed are at such an inflection point in our history. Thomas Dermine spoke about, this massive energy transition. László oriented us toward the macro connection. The architecture has to be like streamlined and aligned. And what is striking is that we need a sense of renewed perspective. And indeed, there is something, I guess, quite powerful in articulating decarbonizing and democratizing. Yesterday, we spent a day on decommodifying, which is also actually a key response to this challenge, because indeed that will help to address the problem raised by Alyssa, which is when workers are in those industries which are the most affected by the transition and which absolutely need to get out of business. So in those firms, we need to provide a response that is clear and that can secure people in their not only livelihood, but also in terms of securing their skills so that they can engage into other types of jobs with similar skills where they will actually develop new job positions. We discussed that quite intensely yesterday with Pavlina Cherneva and the plenary speakers. So I'm not going to open up that debate again, but just to say that given the magnitude of the problems, indeed, it's very striking hearing from you that either we imagine that this transition will go with some technocratic, even sort of top-down, despotic type of government, which could maybe do a lot to bring us to decarbonize, but the cost of that would certainly be our political democratic project. So that all the discussions that we have, I guess, only reinforces the point that we need to see how these connections between decarbonizing and democratizing can go. And as Gregor mentioned, indeed, there is not a lot that is currently done. I think László was very right in raising the just transition, perspective, which has been a motto at the EU level, and which means something in terms of securing workers, securing their skills, but it's not close to addressing the real issue, which is to give people the sense that they have a say in orienting what is happening and that they have a buy-in, as Thomas Dermine was keen to secure a buy-in in the current transition. So I want to sort of give you an opportunity to address one last opportunity to speak, and also I invite Naïm Cordemans to join this last turn. If you want to react to anything that was said, address the question about how can we, what are the best levers, to use to spread the democratized firm or democratizing them, and that will be, I guess, the end of the panel. So I suggest we go Naeem, and then Alyssa, Gregor, and László to end the panel.
Thank you very much, Isabel. If I may, I will just make two comments or two points and two comments on your paper. First point is to underline the need to invest and the fact that Europe is really lagging behind, especially if we compare with China. Europe has been investing about 1.3% of the GDP in 2019 to fight climate change. China is investing 2.7% of GDP. And studies from the European Commission has shown that Europe should invest about 3.7% just to in the energy and transport infrastructure to make sure that it is in position to satisfy to its commitment with regard to climate change. So this represents about 520 billion a year for the coming decades. So about 5,000 billion euro. I wanted to put this into underline, to put this into perspective and to underline the need to go much further in terms of public investment, and also thinking about the role of the ECB and the Euro system, because I believe democratic government will have enormous difficulties to finance this investment, especially when they are small, especially when they are indebted. The budgetary and the political cost is so big that the risk is not to be able to achieve that. And one way, obviously, to be able to finance this transition is to reach to the Euro system, and to make sure that in the objective of the Euro system there is not only price stability, at least not price stability as the only primary objective, but also carbon neutrality. I think that would be something to be debated, to what extent the Euro system should also adopt carbon neutrality and environmental protection as an objective. Currently, it has to support the general objective of the European Union, but this is a secondary objective. This primary objective is price stability, and we should think about it. Now, to comment about your work rapidly. One is about the involvement of worker in the companies. I think more democracy within companies, within the firm, to make sure that the right of worker is much better respected, and that they have a word to say in the management of the company is a great thing. But I'm not sure this is going to contribute to the fight against climate change and to environmental protection, as the interest of the worker, especially in some firms, is not necessarily aligned with the interest of the society as a whole. So I'm not sure that's important, certainly, but I'm not sure that's a way to also address environmental issues. And the last point maybe is about the right of work, the job guarantee. Also, I'm a bit skeptic about the idea that the public sector could be aware of what is best for people, of what is best for worker. To what extent people receive this kind of job, the other kind of job. And I think the idea of a universal basic income could be, should also be thought about in these circumstances, as people could decide on their own what is best for them to do when they are not working when they are not choosing the proper word. Well, I will stop here.
Okay.
Sorry for
Yeah. So I'm so sorry you could not attend yesterday, because we addressed all those questions, and indeed a job guarantee is not it does not infringe on, of course, the ability of people to choose, and even to choose their job, actually. But the idea is to create the jobs that actually the market will not create, because we realize today that there are so many positions to be created that there is no demand for it in terms of purchasing power. Nevertheless, to ensure taking care of the planet, we need those jobs to be created. So that's the tenant there. But we're not going to open up that issue. But I would be delighted to discuss more about it if there is an interest about that. And we had actually today a panel about green finance in Europe and the role of the ECB with Daniela Gabor, who's really a stellar economist working on the mandate of the ECB, and she was just simultaneously chairing a panel on that topic too. So thank you for raising those dimensions that are absolutely key to this debate. Now to Alyssa.
I really actually have to get going because I have to. I could say something really briefly, which is just. I mean, there was a lot to say to Naeem's comments. Really briefly, I think that it's true that workers' interests don't necessarily align with those of society in general, but certainly we know that firms don't either, and workers are are in their sort of non-worker capacity also members of society, are citizens in a democracy, and firms are not. So I think that is one important difference that we should talk about. But to one point I wanted to highlight from Gregor's comments was that I think the sort of shifting landscape of decarbonization, where I'm a little more skeptical maybe that companies are really rushing to decarbonize. I think they're rushing to look like they're decarbonizing, and in some cases to actually get decarbonizing, and other cases to maybe get ahead of regulations. In some cases, I think genuinely are concerned about financial risk, and the financial institutions are clearly starting to think about climate risk in a new way. But I think we should reserve judgment on that a little bit, because really in the past 6 months to a year, we've seen like a huge rush of sort of corporate of shift in corporate sort of orientation. But you know, I wanna not be too optimistic about that, but I do really want to emphasize Gregor's point that we have to make sure that that also comes with the labor piece, and that is not sort of a, well, we can only, you know, again, though, we can only do one, we can decarbonize, or we can you know, support worker protections and bring workers along in this transition. And as László mentioned, the just transition is a really important framework for that. So I'm going to have to jump off now, but
yes,
I'm sorry to miss Gregor and László's final comments, but it was really great.
I'm sorry. I've been a bad chair, so it's all my fault. Thank you so much, Alyssa. I guess one last minute for Gregor, and then the closing minute for László. Thank you, Alyssa. Have a very good day. Gregor, are you still there?
Can you hear me?
No, the sound is really breaking now.
Well, in that case, over to László.
Yes.
Any point that I would make is going to be too garbled by the internet connection.
Like you're speaking, yeah, you're speaking from Mars, I guess, or I don't know. Sorry about that, Gregor. So yeah, then on to László, if we are more lucky. Oh, and now we don't have any sound from László coming in. Is it possible? No, we cannot hear you. So I guess it's the same problem as we had before the session started, László. We just don't hear you. Okay, so this is very frustrating, but I think we're gonna call this an end. And it's time actually to go to the plenary, because it starts now at the hour. So thank you very much again for being here, for engaging with the Global Forum. I really appreciated this discussion, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you for your invitation. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you, Naeem. Thank you so much. And let's talk soon.